welcome to GLPs, How Far They Will Go. It is a delight to be here with you at the World Medical Innovation Forum. Today we have two panel moderators. We have Tazeen and Ahmad. Tazeen, welcome, and let's introduce yourself.
So I'm Tazeen Ahmad. I'm one of the senior biotech analysts at Bank of America. It's my pleasure to be here this morning, and thank you in advance for joining. I think we'll have a good session learning a little bit more about the GLP-1 class.
And I'm Fatima, Cody, Stanford. I'm an obesity medicine physician and scientist at Massachusetts General Hospital, associate professor of medicine and pediatrics at Harvard Medical School. We're joined today with three wonderful panelists. I'm going to introduce them, starting from left to right. We have Dr. Vanita Aroda, who is the director of the Diabetes Clinical Research Center at the Brigham and Women's Hospital. She's associate professor at the Harvard Medical School. And next to her is my dear friend and colleague, Dr. Caroline Apovian, who's the co-director of the Center for Weight Management and Wellness at the Brigham and Women's Center. She's a professor of medicine at Harvard Medical School. And then next to her, and also directly next to our co-moderator, is Paul LaViolette, the managing partner and chief operating officer at the SV Health Investors. And it's a delight to have them with us today. I'm going to have Tazeen bring us in as we talk about this really important topic of GLP-1s or glucagon-like peptide-1 agonists. How far would they go? We can't get away from talking about these. They're everywhere in the news. Dr. Apovian and I have had a chance to talk with these with our wonderful moderators on 60 Minutes, Oprah, with Sanjay Gupta about these. But Tazeen, why don't you bring us in as we really begin to delve into this topic today on stage?
So maybe we can start off on the topic of innovations and applications, if that makes sense for everybody.
Absolutely.
So what do you think? I think everybody in the room has some idea of what GLP-1s are, but what are you thinking about next generation medications like dual and triple agonists in anti-obesity treatment? I know there's a lot of companies looking at that topic, and how do you think they could really differentiate from each other?
Well, first of all, let's call them what they really are, which is niche therapies. The dual and triple agonists are not just GLP-1s. GLP-1 is just one gut hormone. Niche therapies are nutrient-stimulated hormonal therapies. They were discovered starting with GLP-1 back in 1985, and we now know that all of these gut hormones are altered, the secretion are altered after metabolic bariatric surgery. And that's how we know that they are in control, their secretion controls energy expenditure. And after bariatric surgery, you can lose up to 100 or more pounds and keep it off. And the reason why is not because you're restricting the stomach and not because you're malabsorbing nutrients, but you are altering the secretion of gut hormones, those hormones which go to the brain and solicit hunger, and those hormones that go to the brain and solicit satiety. And with bariatric surgery, the hormones that go to the brain and solicit satiety are increased. And that's why you can lose weight and defend a lower body fat mass. So that's what niche therapies are. And we've discovered them after bariatric surgery and realizing what they do. They don't just increase insulin secretion, but they also go to the brain and give you satiety. And the first one that was put out on the market for obesity was the GLP-1 semaglutide. So the question was, what about dual and triple agonists?
Yeah.
Well, we're jumping the gun here. We have great weight loss and maintenance of that weight loss with semaglutide and tirzepatide, which is GLP-1 and GIP, another gut hormone. And so before we start looking at other dual and triple agonists, let's look at the utilization of semaglutide and tirzepatide. 42% of Americans have obesity. I don't know what percent are now getting niche therapies, but it's not 42% of the population. It's not even 10% of the population. And we are seeing a shift now with niche therapies being prescribed more and more, but we really have not penetrated the market yet. Now, dual and triples, great. Cagrilintide, semaglutide combination, we're getting 17% weight loss at 26 weeks. If you extrapolate to a year, that's going to be double that, over 30% weight loss. That's right smack in the middle of what the Roux-Y gastric bypass can do. With semaglutide, we have 17% weight loss. With tirzepatide, we have 22% weight loss. That's really good weight loss. And yes, these other dual and triples are going to give you more weight loss. But again, we haven't penetrated the market yet.
I'll just add, I think it's good to take a step back and realize that we didn't get here overnight. And, even to understand the safety profile, the efficacy profile of GLP-1 receptor agonists has taken us, 1 to 2 decades versus exenatide, then liraglutide. We've seen efficacy for diabetes, then for weight, and then cardiovascular outcomes. And so what I think is exciting about the new, understanding of underlying physiology is that, maybe there can be some agonism or antagonism to optimize the best for health in terms of glucose, metabolic health, and cardiovascular risk.
Okay. Now, Paul, I do want to bring you into the conversation because I know you're sitting there and you're just like, I can't sit here.
I'm very patient.
Yes, I understand. Now, with the rise in these therapies, particularly as we think about these medications across cardiometabolic conditions, right now we have primarily focused on the use of these medications for the 2 primary conditions that are being treated, which are diabetes and obesity. We have seen a major shortage, a supply chain issue that has really led to some major issues. What are you seeing particularly? I mean, we can talk about this, and I'll actually bring in Dr. Apovian, Dr. Caroline Apovian, Dr. Vanita Aroda to talk about this on the patient side. But what are you seeing particularly in terms of the market, in terms of the demand? What are we seeing on Wall Street? What are we seeing in terms of the demand on that side? And then I'm going to turn it back to our physicians here on the stage to talk about what we're seeing in terms of patient care and access.
Well, demand is remarkable, and it's driven obviously by the expanded indications. That's only going to increase as we get more clinical indications on label. Supply has been constrained, principally not because of drug manufacturing, but because these drugs are injected. And the injection mechanism, the actual injector manufacturing, cannot keep up with current demand. I know Lilly today is building 2 1 million square foot manufacturing facilities in the United States. So there's every effort, every resource being thrown at the effort to bring supply up to match demand. When you think about demand today, it's difficult to track because unlike chronic condition medications where patients get on them and stay on them with some degree of consistency, patients are on and off of these drugs. So if you look at total number of prescriptions, let's say in 2023, it was probably 7 to 9% of the adult population, far from the background prevalence of obesity, but a significant population, 25 to 30 million prescriptions. Compare that to other drugs, it's not quite as large yet, but it will become based on some balance of average selling price and demand. This will become a probably $30 to $40 billion category in the next 1 to 2 years, and is projected to be a $70 billion category by 2030 or 2032. So this is the biggest drug story without doubt. And it is because it affects so many chronic conditions and has so many potential clinical benefits.
But Paul, how are we going to get the price down?
Well,
Inquiring
competition,
minds want to
so
know.
first of all, prices started at the $1,100, $1,200 a month level. In some cases, they're already down below $500. Now, this is a complex world of pricing, as you know about PBMs, you know about the rebate structures. 20 to 40% of patients are in insurance policies today that provide coverage. Medicare provides no coverage. So it's a combination of incremental supply, which at which point artificial protections, if you will, for price will go down, incremental coverage, bringing more patients in, and I think expansion of on-label. At some point, drug companies will look at this and say, listen, we can afford to lower the price because the expansion of the total market far offsets the margin we lose by dropping ASP.
Maybe on that point of expansion of market, a minute ago you mentioned that they're being studied in all different indications. It could be Alzheimer's, it could be Parkinson's, it
inflammatory disease.
Exactly. Yeah. All these indications. How do you feel about these? And maybe I'll throw it back to Fatima to get her initial thoughts about, is there anything that strikes you as particularly likely to work?
So absolutely. Just last week I was speaking at the National Academies of Medicine on this very topic. They did an entire day looking at the role of GLP-1 agonists in the use of these medications for central nervous system conditions, Parkinson's disease, substance use disorder, Alzheimer's disease. A lot of these studies are preclinical, but what I can tell you for the three of us that are on the stage that are treating these conditions we are seeing within our patients that are using these for metabolic disease some indication that these medications are effective in these disease processes. We're even seeing these useful in those that have rheumatologic conditions like gout, or rheumatoid arthritis and other conditions. But what this sets us up for is even greater shortage and demand for these drugs. What we're finding on our day-to-day basis is that we can't get these drugs for patients with metabolic disease. And so as the need for these conditions rises in these other clinical disorders, is that there's going to be greater demand, not only here in the US, but worldwide, and we're going to have less and less drug to distribute throughout the population. This is going to greater affect the population of those that are most affected by these conditions, which are those marginalized communities where, going back to who are less likely to afford these agents, are those communities that are from lower socioeconomic positions. Now, when we look at drug pricing, for example, Dr. Apovian and I were at a dinner talking to our colleagues in Canada, just those north of the border, and we were looking at a medication like semaglutide, for those of you who are unaware which drug I'm talking about. It's under the trade name of Ozempic or Wegovy. That price point is about $278 north of the border. Here in the United States, that could go from somewhere between $1,000 to $1,600 a month here in the United States. So our price negotiation here in the United States, of course, we have different economics in terms of negotiation for these drugs, but it's significantly different. And we have to do something better here to make sure that we are accommodating those individuals that are most likely to benefit from these agents here in the US. And so that's something that I'd just like to bring up. I'd love to, then pitch it to my physician colleagues here, because we are dealing with this issue of, and I think Paul brought this up, where patients are going on and off of these agents. We're having inconsistency in dosing. This is leading to side effects for our patients. We already, I guess we can talk about the side effects. We know that dose titration for semaglutide, for treating patients with obesity, 0.25 milligrams, 0.5, 1.7, 2.4, for example, for those patients. For patients on tirzepatide under the trade names of Mounjaro, Zepbound, we have that 2.5, 5, 7.5, 10, 12.5, and 15. You guys see, I do actually see patients. People don't know if I do that. But we have problems with being able to titrate patients up on these medications. What are you doing in your clinics when you're running into issues with prior authorizations, not able to titrate up on these medications? How are you dealing with the stress, the strain, the headache that is the supply chain issue?
So I can start with that. I think it actually becomes part of the shared decision-making process. When we initiate these therapies, we let them know that there are these access issues that are happening and that we will have to play the game a little bit. So please, I might give you 2 different prescriptions just so that you have a backup in case your current one, there's an access or supply issue. Please let me know in advance. Let's make sure we have a good stream and have your backup pharmacies in order. So for people where we've had to learn the hard way, when we haven't done this, there's a lot of frustration on both ends.
Yeah, we have hired people to handle all the prior authorizations, which can really be, it can take 2 to 6 weeks for one patient prior authorization to go through to get access to the drug, believe it or not, with the insurance company. So this, unfortunately, many patients are calling in, they're going through Epic and messaging us, where is my prescription? And the stopgaps that we have been doing, you know, we were around before Ozempic came on board, and we were prescribing other medications, and they're still out there and they're cheap. They're not great. What I mean by not great is that they have side effects like elevations in blood pressure, pulse, anxiety, insomnia, paresthesias, and they don't lower cardiovascular risk. However, they are out there, and we can prescribe those medications along with diet and exercise in the interim for the patient to be able to get on the medication.
Just one dynamic that everyone should be aware of. We're talking here about academic medical center intense programs for weight loss and weight management. 60% of all GLP-1 prescriptions are made by family practitioners. So when you think about the gross demand, it's coming from really, well, I'll call it that lowest end of the marketplace. And that is likely creating a significant amount of churn because those patients are not being as carefully managed. They're likely to have false expectations, and then they're likely to be on and off. And I think that's an artificial and hopefully transient influence in the market for supply and demand today. But as supply goes up and as patients are more comprehensively managed, I would expect we'll see some normalization in this.
Now, maybe on that point, just to take it a step further, we've started to hear more anecdotes about patients who, you know, either because of insurance reasons or because they reach whatever their target weight loss amount is, who take a drug holiday or stop taking the drug for a bit. What happens when they, in some cases, go back on? We've been hearing it's not as easy to lose the weight. Have you heard that from your patients, and have you heard colleagues talk about that?
You know, that is, even without medication, when you lose weight through diet and exercise, and then you start to gain it back, and you go back on the diet and exercise, it's harder to lose the weight again initially. And there are physiological reasons for that. When you lose weight, as Rudy Leibel discovered a long time ago now, 1995, gut hormones change, and so do fat hormones. And all these changes are initiated in order to get the body to regain the weight, because your body has a set point in this environment. So you weigh 250 pounds in this environment. If you were in, you know, another part of the world that didn't have all this, you know, easily available food, you would not be defending that set point. But here in the United States, you are. And when you try to lose weight, these hormone changes lower your total energy expenditure and increase your hunger so that you gain the weight back. That's what happens with any diet and exercise program. So it's not about the GLP-1. It's about the body's physiology. So if you stop the GLP-1, which is giving you satiety, that is going to, you know, in some cases cause hyperphagia, which is hunger that cannot be satiated very easily, and you regain the weight. And also, your total energy expenditure is down, and so of course it's going to be harder to start losing weight again with your total energy expenditure being down. It's temporarily down, but it's still down. And that's from you know, signals going to muscle, which is conserving energy. So when you walk, you burn less energy walking after you lose weight, believe it or not. And the only way to mitigate that, and I'm going off target here, is resistance exercise training and a high-protein diet. That's why diet is so important.
Now, Vanita, I want to bring in a major issue that we've seen, particularly as we've looked at these GLP-1s and that's that heterogeneity of response. So we have patients that do very well on the medications. We have patients that may be average in terms of their response. So when we look at semaglutide, John Wilding and colleagues showed that like an average response would be about 15% total body weight loss. Yastreboff and colleagues showed that tirzepatide would show about a 22% average body weight loss. That'd be an average response. And then we have, unfortunately, those low to no non-responders. But even those low to non-responders may get some metabolic response, meaning they may show response with a decrease in hemoglobin A1C, so average improvement in their blood sugar. They may show improvements in cholesterol readings and things of that sort. So tell us about what you're seeing in your patients in terms of this heterogeneity and response to GLP-1s, and how do you counsel your patients through this?
Excellent question. So just like no two drugs are created equal, no two patients are created equally. And we really understand that at the patient level. When we see these studies that report mean values, none of our patients represent that exact mean. And so I think what's challenging nowadays, though, is that it depends on what response we're looking at. Are we looking at weight? Are we looking at glucose? Are we looking at inflammation? Are we looking at the whole cardiometabolic picture? At the American Diabetes Association just a few months ago, the investigators presented on the SELECT trial, where in people with established cardiovascular disease without diabetes but with obesity were randomly assigned to semaglutide or placebo. Even those who didn't lose the weight still had cardiovascular benefit. So that really just kind of makes us all scratch our heads a little bit. But to your point, there will be some people who may not respond in all of our different ways, and I would say encourage them to enroll in clinical trials so we can understand why.
Absolutely, absolutely. Now, I think it's really important, that key point is that we need to recognize that GLP-1s are not the magical cure. I think that we hear this often in the media that these drugs will solve obesity or solve diabetes, but there is heterogeneity in response, and I see this in my clinical practice all the time. And so when I put patients on these therapies, I tell them if they are a responder, if being the key word there, then we will continue them on these therapies. But if is the key word. And so I think we need to make sure that we recognize that while many patients will respond to these therapies, that not all patients will respond to these therapies, and we need to follow them, and they need to be working with clinicians that do understand these therapies. And this will now bring me to a point that I think that all of us can respond to, and this is the role in compounding pharmacies with these agencies, with these particular drugs. So with the shortages, we've heard about compounders. Some people have decided to advertise during key events like the Super Bowl. Many of you guys may have watched it. My home team people decided to perform during the Super Bowl, usher in key individuals. All right, but some key players have decided to compound these medications due to shortages. The problem with compounders is that the FDA has found that the compounding medications, of course, have not undergone any rigorous testing. There are no studies published in any peer-reviewed journals at all on compounded medications. There's been a 20% rise to poison control centers with compounded medications, but people are accessed as compoundings. So I want to pitch this to all on the panel. What do you think about compounding drugs, particularly in the GLP-1 categories? What are you seeing? How does it affect what we're thinking about with GLP-1s? Which groups are likely to go after the compounded meds here in the US? So I'm going to pitch this to all.
Well, I'll start. We own a compounding pharmacy in our portfolio. Bear in mind what I mentioned earlier. Lilly is building 2 1 million square foot facilities to fulfill demand. When you think about scale in pharmaceutical supply, it's antithetical to think that a niche sort of hand production compound pharmacy is the solution. So can it emerge locally, provide some solutions, notwithstanding the questions about quality control? Yes. Is that a thematic solution to this overwhelming market demand? I would say very unlikely.
Do you think that that the agency will step in to regulate? Because in New York City, we see ads for these smaller companies on subways now. So So how do you
I
make
don't-
sure that the public is educated?
Obviously, there are different levels of compounding pharmacy and different levels of regulations.
Yeah.
In this regard, they're doing exactly what they're intended to do. So I don't know that FDA would come in and say, stop because you're actually meeting the regulations. I just don't think it's likely to be a major part of the overall market.
But let's review what the regulations are. The FDA did stipulate that during shortages of important medications, it is okay
Right.
to compound as long as, I think, the pharmacy is registered. Is that right, Paul?
Yes.
Yeah. So registration means that you have some oversight
Right.
on the purity of the compound. So I certainly have had patients who've come in to see me and have told me that they're on a compounded semaglutide because, their primary care, their insurance won't cover, and then there's a shortage. And I don't prescribe compounded semaglutide or tirzepatide, but I have asked my patients to make sure that where they're getting it from is a registered pharmacy, and then they have some kind of assurance that what they're getting is the pure compound.
Right, and that was what I was getting at. Do patients know the difference between the product that a branded drug company is sending to them versus what they're getting from the compounded pharmacy?
But I'm going to interject here and state that the FDA recently ran experiments on several of the compounded pharmacies and found that the agent that they were supplying typically did not even include anything that remotely resembled semaglutide or tirzepatide. And so this is why I think they've seen so many poisonings, and a lot of the side effects that we're hearing about in the lay press, et cetera, are attributed to semaglutide and tirzepatide, but actually are not even the agent that we think it is, i.e. the agent that is being touted to be semaglutide or tirzepatide based upon their own studies that were just reported on at the national academies.
Okay, that's good to know. So perhaps
Yeah.
the agency might, over time, find it necessary to clarify.
Well, certainly this is a temporary fix. As soon as Lilly's 1 million square foot plant is up and running, hopefully.
Next week. Takes time.
Yeah.
But I think, this expands to just really over-the-counter self kind of navigation of this pathway, as opposed to engaging with your physician, following tried and true pathways. I think we get into trouble with these agents when there's too much of kind of self-prescribing. We've demonstrated in the clinical trials for many of these agents, you start low, you go slow to ensure individualized tolerability, individualized effect. And that is part of the shared journey between patient and clinician.
Now, I want to change the conversation, taking it away from necessarily just the GLP-1s and all of the issues with GLP-1s, and really get into this conversation surrounding stigma and bias, which we've dealt with by and large. We know that one of the most common forms of bias is weight stigma and bias. Unfortunately, obesity is a disease that you wear, and we judge people based upon how much excess adipose. Adipose is that tissue that is fat that one carries. And so how do you think the GLP-1s particularly, or this idea or framing of obesity as a disease, it was on the front page of the New York Times just yesterday. They called me a prominent obesity doctor, did not call me by name in the first paragraph. I think that was interesting. But regardless of that, which I guess I'll call her on that, is a really important conversation. We have not decided to recognize that individuals that have obesity actually have a disease, and we judge them based upon their size. How do we begin to change that conversation, take away the stigma and bias that has been long held, still is held today? We judge people by how they look, how much excess adipose they carry. Even the chairs that we're sitting in today would not accommodate a larger sized individual. Let's talk about that, and I think that was my phone that dropped. Let's talk about that, and let's talk about how we can begin to change that conversation. So I would pitch that to whoever would like to respond on that topic.
Well, I think it is changing. It's changing because of the advertising that there are drugs out there that can help you. And last year, my team and I saw 12,000 patients for obesity. There is a waiting list of 1 year to get into our center. A few years ago, this was not the case. So people with the disease are coming because they know there's help for the first time in many, many years, probably in the history of the United States. So I think that is changing. So people are presenting themselves for treatment because they know that they have a disease. There are less and less people out there thinking this is a matter of willpower, I can do it on my own. And with that, we are now open to more of the treatments that we've had for years and years. We've had metabolic bariatric surgery, which is probably the most efficient and one of the safest ways to lose 100 pounds and keep it off, because it alters the secretion of many of the hormones that we're now putting into pens. And people are open to hearing about metabolic bariatric surgery. It is not the, I used to get, I know so-and-so who died, I know so-and-so who gained the weight back. You never tell the cardiologist, I know so-and-so who had a restenosis after their stent, right? So you don't even think about it. The doctor says you need a stent. When can I have the stent? You need bariatric surgery. Oh, no, doc, don't even talk to me about that. So things are changing, and it's through education, and it's through the understanding that we have a disease that is not a matter of willpower, and that is removing the shame. And it's about the shame that prevents people with the disease from seeking treatment.
I would just add, weight comes and goes. There's lots of things that drive weight up and lots of things that drive weight down. But the health journey remains the constant. So reframing the conversation around health, holistic health, of which weight is a part of that, is, I think, part of the way forward in terms of destigmatizing any chronic condition.
Maybe on that point, Vanita, there are other benefits outside of weight loss that can be gained from taking a GLP-1. So how do you advise patients? Let's say in their mind, they need to lose, like a number is in their head, and maybe they're not achieving that number, at least not easily, or it's taking longer. How do you encourage your patients to stay on? Like cardiovascular benefits are one thing that you can get, not necessarily through the same amount of weight loss.
So in our diabetes clinic, I don't start with the diabetes. I actually start with the whole body risk assessment. So what does your long-term cardiovascular risk look like? Is there any evidence of fatty liver? What does your kidney status look like? And then after we establish the goals, we match the therapies accordingly. Again, it's a conversation around holistic health. And I was privileged to be part of the International ADA ESD guidance that really shifted the approach to diabetes care, where we said that it's actually a continuum of the full circle, and weight is a part of that picture, but it's not the whole picture.
Now, we know that the two big players in this space, particularly as we look at GLP-1s, have been Novo and Lilly, Paul. But we know that they can't do it alone. We've seen that they can't do it alone. Right now, we have over 1 billion people with obesity worldwide, right? There is no country that has seen a decrease in obesity anywhere in the world. So how do you see smaller companies with less market share, how are they going to be able to gain foothold in the space? At the ADA meeting, which Dr. Aroda has brought up quite a few times, 27 new medications were debuted at the ADA meeting. We teased the ADA that they should just call themselves an obesity meeting, because that's what they're doing lately. But how do you see that changing as we see more and more people wanting to come into this space? I call it a blue ocean strategy. I have an MBA also. So what do you think will happen as we really start to see so many people beginning to really take interest in this space?
Well, Lilly and Novo are obviously enjoying the benefits of their recent success. They have a combined market cap of $1.8 $4 trillion. And so they are going, first place at the core, if you will, of the strategy is that they are investing aggressively in pipeline. They're going to do everything with their vast resources to try to preserve that. As disruptive new compounds come along, listen, a new small company is highly unlikely to make it through, just because the voracious acquisitive potential of Pfizer, of J&J, of Amgen, all of whom have a pipeline of AZ, they're all working in this direction already, and they all want a significant piece of what they see. So this will not be left to the devices, if you will, of small pharma or biotech emerging with a new compound. Anything that I think has a remote hint of positive outcome will be acquired early, money being not much of an object, and will become part of a larger portfolio of large pharma going after macro competitive dynamics with Lilly and Novo.
So you think basically Novo and Lilly will?
I think they will acquire. Those who are familiar with the current FTC will maybe question how many compounds they can build up in their own pipelines. But there will be aggressive bidding going on between, again, the Pfizers and the Lillys, the J&Js and the Novos. They'll be battling for next generation compounds.
They already are with drugs that can spare muscle. And a few of the companies, Lilly and Novo, both have acquired that in their portfolio and are combining those agents with semaglutide and tirzepatide.
So on that point, what would you like to see improved with either GLP-1s in next generation or these other potential mechanisms like amylins, for example?
So what's the unmet need?
Well, where would be the ideal area for improvement? Is it more weight loss? Is it less concern of muscle loss? Is it potentially less longer-term side effects, which maybe we just don't know all the longer-term side effects yet as it relates to weight loss? But where would you like to see something improve in the next generation?
Well, again, I always bring up metabolic bariatric surgery because we get the weight loss and we get a lot of weight loss. And what is there to improve after bariatric surgery? Certainly the body composition. So with bariatric surgery, you do lose quite a bit of weight. It's rapid, and if you're not eating a high-protein diet and doing resistance exercise, which most people are not, unfortunately, you do lose quite a bit of muscle mass. 20 to 50% of total weight loss is muscle. And when you lose muscle, you also increase insulin resistance and all of the complications get worse. And so I do think that preserving muscle as much as you can is a good avenue, especially for our older patients. So for people older than 60 who already have sarcopenia, which is loss of muscle mass with aging, they are getting on these niche therapies, and they are, we think, are going to lose more muscle than the younger patients who have more of the ability to be anabolic when they eat high protein. So I do think that going after muscle-sparing therapies and combining them is probably a good idea. I'm not a big fan. However, one part of me says, yes, that's a good idea. The other part says, well, let's talk about diet and exercise to mitigate the muscle loss, because you can do it. You can do it if you're on a resistance exercise training and you're eating healthy. But that, having said that, we know that most people are not doing that, and so that's why those combos are gaining traction, and I do think they will be part of the next generation.
And then I think the key thing that we're seeing actually in those of us that have been doing this for a long time is that the people that are actually having the highest response are the patients that are post-bariatric surgery plus are on these medications. So the patients that are getting to 40, 50, 60+% total body weight loss are those patients that are on those combination therapies. These are things that we didn't think we were going to see in this lifetime. I'm getting to the point where I'm having patients actually stop or slow down therapies. I did not think that this was something I would ever see in my lifetime. And so that is we're in a space in place that we did not think was possible when we're looking at those combination therapies. We are not hearing about that as much, but for those of us that have been doing this for a long time, that's the space that we're in. Dr. Aroda, I think you're going to say something.
Yeah, I also think there's scope for looking at more integrative approaches in terms of pharmacologic and non-pharmacologic therapies, because for far too long we've kind of isolated as looking at just pharmacotherapies. But what is the benefit of integrating chosen therapy with a structured lifestyle physical activity program? Is there an off-ramp? Is there a temporary pause possibility? We don't have those answers. And I think what you're seeing is the clinical trials demonstrate their efficacy in established disease, but now we're pushing towards earlier and earlier stages. And so, before we start thinking about lifelong therapies at very young ages, we really need to think about some of these lifelong scenarios.
Now, one question I want to ask is, because I've been seeing this or hearing this also, and Paul, I'm going to address this to you, but I also, if others want to chime in, is the economic impact of GLP-1s on other industries, healthcare, food, beauty. For example, I have heard that companies like Walmart are tracking the purchasing of GLP-1s in their pharmacy and seeing what is happening if they go and shop for other items in Walmart. Like, are they buying less processed foods and things of this sort? What are we seeing and what's happening across the broader landscape in these other industries? How are GLPs impacting the whole landscape? And my idea is that they are impacting the full landscape. And so I'd love to hear your thoughts surrounding that question.
Yeah, they're beginning to. I think we have to just take a step back and say, okay, we're in the first phase of this drug assimilation into society. We're seeing remarkable results come out, and when a new clinical study a result is announced, we see entire healthcare sectors devalued in anticipation of what this can mean over time. But that hasn't become manifest yet. So if you think about the breadth of cardiovascular, cardiorenal, musculoskeletal, if you lose weight, you may not need as many knee replacements. Heart failure, hypertension, what will the impact be on interventional cardiovascular disease? So far, there hasn't really been one that's measurable, but it's only a matter of time. You look at SURMOUNT-4, which was a study on sleep apnea, and a significant reduction in AHI, lower your CPAP requirements, maybe more patients can stay on CPAP. The result was a company like Inspire with hypoglossal nerve stim dropped 30% of its market cap. So the healthcare implications are just beginning. They may be offset a little bit by literally patients living longer because we're not dealing with reduced lifespan due to a BMI of 40. And if a patient lives to be relatively healthy until 75, they actually can probably live for another 10 or 12 years, by which point other chronic conditions will come in. So there are offsets. Food. Who would think, right, that the entire economy for food would be changed by a single drug? The average patient on GLP-1s reduces overall food purchases by 8 to 10%. That's what a Walmart is watching. 60% of all recipients of these drugs report that they go to restaurants less often. So the entire restaurant sector is watching this and looking at menus. And do we have a more protein-rich menu because people on GLP-1s have lost weight, but they know they need to consume proteins to make up for nutrition loss? On health overall, patients are worried about muscle loss, and so nutritional supplements are increasing. Hair loss, which anyone who undergoes bariatric surgery knows, sudden loss of weight and significant drop in nutrient leads to hair loss. Ozempic face, we've heard about that. Fillers are increasing because patients want to look better after they've had significant change in their facial appearance. So there's no end in sight to the repercussions of these drugs, principally with health, but derivative all the way through the massive market of things like food and restaurants, which you'd be hard pressed to look at a medical trend that caused a disruption in food consumption. You think about food grows with population roughly 2%, but if you factor in 10 to 15% of the adult population on drugs, reducing their food intake by 10%, that would completely offset the growth in the consumption of food in the United States.
Can I maybe bring that back to affordability? So it's great for people who can afford to get fillers or who can afford to eat more healthy after the weight loss, but to the point of for access to patients who may not necessarily have access at all times, how are they going to manage, you know, the post effects of GLP-1? And maybe we have 30 seconds to answer that question.
Yeah, I think we're actually concluded, so I think they've turned off our time.
Oh.
So I want to thank everyone so much. We won't be able to answer that, but we want to thank you so much for coming to see us. GLPs-1, how far will they go? From Dr. Vanita Aroda, Dr. Caroline Apovian, myself, Dr. Fatima, Cody, Stanford, Tazeen, Ahmad, and from LaViolette. Thanks so much for being here today. We hope you've enjoyed our session. If you would like to stay around and ask questions, we'll be here. Thank you so much.